Welcome back to the Wilderness Protocol. My daughter called me 3 times the night she died. I was in a meeting about quarterly budgets and let it go to voicemail. The first message was normal. Sophie asking if I wanted to grab dinner. Maybe see that new movie she'd been talking about. Her voice was bright. Excited about something. I made a mental note to call her back after the meeting. The second message came an hour later. Her voice was different. Scared. She said she'd found something at work. Something she wasn't supposed to see. She worked as a research assistant at the Vatican secret archives, cataloging documents that hadn't seen daylight for centuries. Sophie said she needed to talk to someone she trusted. The third message was just breathing heavy. Panicked breathing for 37 seconds. Then the line went dead. By the time I got out of my meeting and listened to my voicemails, Sophie was already dead. It was a car accident on Via dei Cappuccini, less than a mile from the Vatican. She'd been driving fast. Witnesses said, like she was running from something. The police called it an accident, a single vehicle collision with a stone wall. There were no skid marks, no evidence of mechanical failure. Just a 26-year-old woman who suddenly drove straight into a wall at 60 miles per hour. I knew Sophie better than that. She was careful, methodical. She double-checked everything, wore her seat belt religiously, and never drove angry or distracted. The Sophie I raised didn't have accidents. The funeral was small. Sophie's mother had died when she was 12, and I was the only family she had left. There were a few colleagues from the archives and some friends from university. Father Benedetti gave a nice eulogy about Sophie's dedication to preserving history. After everyone left, Father Benedetti pulled me aside. "Your daughter was working on something unusual before she died," he said. "A document classification project in sublevel C." "What kind of documents?" "Medieval manuscripts. Theological texts from the 13th century. She'd been assigned to organize a collection that hadn't been properly cataloged." "Did she find something?" Father Benedetti looked uncomfortable. "There were some irregularities in her final reports. References to documents that don't officially exist in our inventory." "What kind of documents?" "Cartographic materials. Maps." I went back to my apartment and drank half a bottle of wine while listening to Sophie's voicemails again. That scared tone in her voice. The way she said she'd found something she wasn't supposed to see. The breathing in the final message. 3 days later, I used my consulting credentials to gain access to the Vatican archives. I'd been working as a historical consultant for various Catholic institutions for 15 years. My specialty was medieval manuscripts, specifically theological texts from the Crusades period. The Vatican had hired me a dozen times to authenticate documents and provide historical context for their collections. My credentials got me into the main archive levels, but sublevel C required special permission. I told the guard I was following up on Sophie's final project, verifying some irregularities Father Benedetti had mentioned. He checked his log and waved me through. Sublevel C was older than the levels above it, with stone walls instead of modern construction and fluorescent lights that hummed and flickered. The air smelled like old parchment and something else. Something organic that had been dead for a long time. Sophie's workstation was exactly as she'd left it. A desk covered with manila folders, a computer that was still logged into the archive database, and a stack of photocopied documents held down with a paperweight shaped like St. Peter's Basilica. I sat in her chair and opened the first folder. The documents were medieval maps. Not the kind historians usually study with kingdoms and trade routes and carefully drawn coastlines. These were different theological maps. Diagrams of spiritual realms that medieval scholars believed existed parallel to the physical world. Most of them were standard stuff, maps of purgatory based on Dante's writings, crude diagrams of the celestial spheres, Artistic interpretations of the Garden of Eden, the kind of thing you'd expect to find in a 13th century monastery library. But the last folder contained something different. The map was drawn on vellum that looked genuinely ancient. Not a copy or reproduction, but an original document from sometime around 1280. The ink was faded but still legible, written in a mixture of Latin and symbols I didn't recognize. At the top of the map, someone had written the true map of hell in Latin. Unlike the other theological maps, this one was incredibly detailed, not metaphorical or artistic, but practical, geographic. It showed terrain features, elevation markers, and what looked like roads or pathways. In the margins, someone had written notes about temperatures, atmospheric conditions, and travel times between different locations. This wasn't a theological exercise. This was a travel guide. I photographed every page of Sophie's notes. Her handwriting was neat and careful, documenting each map with academic precision. She translated portions of the Latin text, cross-referenced the symbols with other medieval sources, and even attempted to create a timeline for when the maps were created. But her final note was different, written in pen instead of pencil. The handwriting rushed and uneven. The coordinates match. Physical locations in Rome. The map is real. I spent the rest of the day in the archive basement reading Sophie's research. She'd been trying to prove that the medieval map wasn't theological fiction. She'd found coordinates embedded in the Latin text and discovered they corresponded to actual locations in modern Rome. According to Sophie's notes, the map showed 7 entry points into hell. 7 physical locations where the boundary between worlds was thin enough to cross. 6 of them were marked as sealed or guarded. But the 7th was marked as open door. The coordinates for the open door led to an address I recognized. The basement of a church called Street Joseph of the Carpenters, less than 2 miles from where I was sitting. I left the archives at closing time and walked through Rome in the evening light. Tourists crowded around the Pantheon, taking photos and buying souvenirs. Street vendors sold postcards and rosaries. Normal people living normal lives, completely unaware that somewhere beneath their feet was supposedly a doorway to hell. Street Joseph of the Carpenters was a small church tucked between a restaurant and a souvenir shop. The kind of place tourists walked past without noticing. I tried the front door, but it was locked. A sign in Italian and English said the church was closed for renovation. I walked around to the back and found a delivery entrance. The lock was old, the kind I'd learned to pick during my college years when I was studying in libraries that stayed locked after hours. Took me 3 minutes to get inside. The church was dark except for emergency lighting. Scaffolding covered the altar area, and plastic sheeting hung from the ceiling. The renovation wasn't a lie, but it also provided perfect cover for someone who wanted to explore without being disturbed. I found the basement entrance behind a door marked "Staff Only" in Italian. Stone steps led down into a darkness that felt older than the church above. I used my phone's flashlight to navigate, counting steps the way Sophie had taught me when we used to explore caves during her childhood. 23 steps down. The basement opened into a room that didn't match the church's architecture. The walls were older, rougher Roman stonework instead of medieval construction. This basement predated the church by centuries. In the center of the room was a well, not a water well. The opening was too wide, and the stones around the edge were carved with symbols that matched the ones on Sophie's map. I shined my light down into it and saw stone steps spiraling into a darkness that seemed to absorb the light. Next to the well was a modern folding table with a laptop computer and several printed documents. Someone else had been here recently. Someone who knew about the map. I opened the laptop. It was password protected, but the screensaver showed a photo of Sophie at her desk in the Vatican archives. It was my daughter's computer, the one she'd been using the night she died. I knew Sophie's passwords. She'd been using variations of the same theme since high school. Combinations of our dog's name and significant dates. Took me 4 tries to get in. The desktop was organized with typical Sophie efficiency. Folders labeled by date. Research projects sorted alphabetically. And everything backed up in multiple locations. But there was a new folder I didn't recognize. Descent Protocol. I opened it and found detailed preparations for a journey. Camping equipment specifications. Temperature charts. Atmospheric readings from various depths underground. And lists of supplies: rope, flashlights, water purification tablets, emergency flares, medical supplies, antibiotics, pain medication, and bandages. Sophie had been planning to go down into that well. Her research notes filled in the gaps. She'd found historical accounts of people who'd used the map to enter hell and return, medieval pilgrims mostly. And a few scholars. One account from 1634 described a Jesuit priest who descended to retrieve a colleague's soul and came back 3 days later with detailed observations about hellish geography. According to the accounts, hell wasn't what most people imagined, no lakes of fire or demons with pitchforks. It was a physical place with terrain and a climate and natural laws. It was dangerous, yes, and hostile to human life, but navigable if you knew what you were doing and came prepared. Sophie had been preparing. Her supply list was thorough and practical. She'd researched survival techniques for extreme environments, studied accounts of deep cave exploration, and even taken a wilderness first aid course. The girl who'd been afraid of horror movies her entire life had been planning to walk into hell. I understood why now. Sophie wasn't just a researcher. She was my daughter, and she'd inherited my stubborn need to understand things that didn't make sense. When she found a map that claimed to show the way to hell, she couldn't just file it away and forget about it. She had to know if it was real. But something had scared her off. Something had made her call me 3 times. Made her drive fast through Rome like she was being chased. I scrolled through her browser history and found searches for Vatican security, archive surveillance, and how to tell if you're being followed. In the days before her death, Sophie had become paranoid. She'd suspected someone was watching her. Her final computer entry was a voice memo recorded the night she died. "Dad, if you're hearing this, it means I'm dead and you found my research. I'm sorry I didn't tell you what I was working on. I wanted to be sure before I got you involved. The map is real. I've confirmed the coordinates, cross-referenced the historical accounts, and even found modern testimonies from people who've made the descent. Hell is a physical place, and there's a way to get there from Rome. But I think someone at the Vatican knows I figured this out. Someone's been following me, moving my files around. I'm scared they're gonna kill me to keep this secret. If something happens to me, finish what I started." The supplies are hidden in Storage Unit 47 at Roma Self-Storage. The key is taped under my desk drawer. Find the truth, Dad. For both of us. The recording ended with Sophie starting to say something else. Then the sound of a car door slamming and an engine starting. The timestamp matched the time of her accident. I sat in that basement for an hour, staring at the well and thinking about my daughter. Sophie had been afraid for her life, but she'd still prepared for a journey into hell. She'd known the risks and accepted them because she needed to know the truth. I'd spent my career studying medieval manuscripts, analyzing historical claims, and separating fact from fiction. But I'd always done it safely from the comfort of libraries and university offices. Sophie had found something that demanded more than academic analysis. She'd found something that required courage. I climbed back up to the church and drove to the storage facility. Unit 47 contained everything Sophie had purchased for her planned descent. Professional-grade camping equipment. Enough supplies for a week underground. Emergency beacons. Waterproof containers. And even a Geiger counter for measuring radiation levels. My practical, Careful daughter had been planning to walk into hell alone. I loaded everything into my rental car and drove back to Street Joseph of the Carpenters. It was past midnight now. The streets empty except for a few tourists stumbling home from bars. I parked in an alley behind the church and carried Sophie's supplies down to the basement. The well waited in the center of the room, dark and patient, according to the map. The stone steps spiraled down for 300 meters before reaching the first waypoint. After that, the path branched into different regions, each with its own climate and hazards. I'd studied the medieval accounts. Most described hell as a series of concentric circles, like Dante's poem, but geographically real. The outer circles were merely unpleasant cold, dark, and inhabited by minor demons who were more annoying than dangerous. The inner circles were progressively worse, with increasing temperatures, atmospheric toxicity, and hostile creatures. But the accounts also described something else: souls. Human souls trapped in various regions, serving sentences for their earthly crimes. Some could be reasoned with, even helped. A few could be rescued and returned to the surface. Sophie hadn't just wanted to explore hell. She'd wanted to help people. I strapped on the climbing harness Sophie had bought and attached my rope to an anchor point she'd installed in the stone floor. The rope was rated for far more weight than I'd ever put on it. But Sophie had been thorough. She'd planned for every contingency except getting murdered by Vatican agents before she could make the descent. I clicked on my headlamp and looked down into the well one more time. The stone steps disappeared into a blackness that my light couldn't penetrate. According to the map, I had about 6 hours before sunrise. Enough time to reach the first waypoint and confirm whether Sophie's research was accurate. Enough time to learn if hell was real. I started climbing down. The stone steps were older than anything I'd ever touched, worn smooth by centuries of feet, and carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. My headlamp beam revealed maybe 10 feet ahead. Beyond that, just a darkness that seemed to eat light. I counted steps as I descended: 100, 200. The temperature dropped steadily, and the air grew thick with a mineral smell like old blood. At step 240, my ears popped from the pressure change. At step 300, the stairs ended. I stood on a stone platform in a cavern so large my light couldn't find the walls. The silence was absolute. There was no echo when I shifted my weight. No sound of water dripping or air moving. Just the kind of silence that makes you aware of your own heartbeat. I consulted Sophie's map. According to her notes, this was the threshold, the boundary between the physical world and hell proper. From here, 7 paths led deeper into the earth, each corresponding to different regions the medieval accounts described as circles. I could see 3 of the paths in my headlamp beam-carved tunnels leading into darkness, each marked with symbols that matched Sophie's translations. The path of the wrathful, the path of the envious, and the path of the gluttonous. Sophie's research indicated the safest route was the path of the wrathful. Counterintuitive, maybe, but the angry dead were easier to deal with than the others. They fought directly, honestly. The envious were manipulative, and the gluttonous were never satisfied. But the wrathful just wanted to hit something. I checked my supplies one more time: water, food, first aid kit, emergency flares, and the most important item according to the medieval accounts, a compass blessed by the Pope. Sophie had somehow acquired one from a Vatican collection, a medieval artifact that allegedly always pointed toward the surface. The tunnel sloped downward at a steep angle. My boots slipped on stones that were slick with condensation. The walls narrowed until I had to duck, then widened into another chamber. This one was occupied. 3 figures stood in the center of the space, facing each other in a triangle. They might have been human once, but centuries underground had changed them. Their skin was gray and leathery, and their clothes had rotted to rags. They were arguing about something in a language I didn't recognize. I approached carefully. According to the accounts, hellish inhabitants fell into two categories: demons, which were hostile to all living things, and souls, which retained some human reasoning. The trick was figuring out which was which before they tried to kill you. "Excuse me," I said in English. All three turned toward me. Their eyes were solid black, but they moved with human curiosity rather than predatory hunger. They were souls, not demons. The nearest one spoke in accented English. "A living man. How long has it been since we've seen a living man?" "I don't know. What year did you die?" 1862. The Battle of Antietam. I was a Union soldier. He gestured to his companions. Marie died in the French Revolution. Giuseppe during the plague years in Venice. That's over a century ago for you. About 2 centuries for them. The soldier nodded. Time moves differently here. We've been having the same argument for decades about whether the war is over. The Civil War ended in 1865. The Union won. Relief flooded the soldier's face. Thank God. I told them Lincoln would see it through. He looked at me with desperate hope. Are you here to take us home? I thought about Sophie's voice memo. Her plan to help trapped souls. Maybe. I'm looking for information first. Have you seen other living people down here? Priests. Mostly. They come through every few decades. Always heading deeper. Most don't come back. When was the last one? Marie spoke up in French accented English. 3 months ago. Perhaps 4. A young woman with dark hair. She carried equipment like yours. Sophie. She'd made it this far. Did she say where she was going? Deeper. To the circle of violence. She said she was looking for someone. Did she find them? Giuseppe shook his head. She never came back. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Sophie hadn't just been exploring hell. She'd been looking for someone specific. Someone in the circle of violence. Can you show me the way she went? The soldier pointed to a tunnel I hadn't noticed. Narrower than the others and marked with symbols that looked like weapons. That leads to the violent dead. But living men shouldn't go there. The things in that circle remember how to kill. I have to find her. The woman. She's dead. Friend. No one goes to the circle of violence and comes back. Her body was found in Rome in a car accident. The 3 souls exchanged glances. Marie spoke carefully. Bodies can be moved. Souls can be trapped. If your friend went deep enough, she might have found something that didn't want her to leave. I thought about Sophie's car accident. No skid marks. No mechanical failure. Like she'd been compelled to drive into that wall. How do I get to the circle of violence? Follow that tunnel for an hour. When you reach the river of blood, you'll need to find a ferryman. They don't work for free. I thanked them and headed for the tunnel. Behind me, the soldier called out. If you make it back to the surface, tell them the war is over. Tell them we did our duty. The path of violence was different from the tunnel I'd used to reach the threshold. It was warmer, with a red tint to the air that made my headlamp beam look pink. The walls were carved with scenes of battle, torture, and warfare throughout history. Medieval knights fighting in crusades, Roman gladiators, and modern soldiers with rifles and tanks. I walked for what felt like hours. The tunnel branched occasionally, but I followed Sophie's map and the compass that always pointed back toward the surface. The air grew thicker, harder to breathe, with a metallic taste that reminded me of old pennies. Then I heard water. The tunnel opened onto a riverbank, not a normal river, but a flow of liquid that was dark red and moved too slowly to be water. The smell was unmistakable. Blood. An entire river of blood flowing through hell. On the far bank stood a city of medieval architecture, but built on an impossible scale. Towers stretched up into the darkness. Bridges spanned chasms, and walls rose and fell like frozen waves. Lights flickered in windows, and I could hear the sounds of combat echoing from the streets. It was the city of violence, where the souls of murderers, tyrants, and warmongers spent their eternities fighting endless battles. A boat approached from upstream. The ferryman was humanoid, but clearly not human, too tall, too thin, with skin that looked like polished obsidian. He wore robes that might have been black or might have been the absence of color entirely. Passage across the river. He said in a voice like grinding stone. What do you offer? The medieval accounts had prepared me for this. I offer a year of my life. Not enough. The living years are worth more than the dead years. But not much more. Crossing costs 5 years. I thought about Sophie somewhere in that city. Trapped or dead or worse. 3 years. For years. Or you swim in blood until you drown. For years. The ferryman gestured to his boat. It was made of bones held together with sinew, but it floated steady on the river of blood. I climbed aboard and immediately felt something drain out of me. A coldness that settled into my bones. A weariness I hadn't felt a moment before. The price is paid, the ferryman said. For years of vitality exchanged for passage. You age faster now until the debt is satisfied. We crossed in silence. The blood was warm and moved with a current that felt alive, pulsing like circulation through massive veins. Things swam beneath the surface, shapes too large and too wrong to be fish. The boat bumped against a stone pier on the far side. The ferryman pointed toward the city. What you seek is in the Tower of Wrath. But the violent dead guard all paths. They will try to kill you because killing is what they know. How do I get past them? You don't. You fight through them. Or you die with them. I stepped onto the pier, and the boat immediately pushed back into the current. There would be no return trip without another price. The city streets were chaos. Souls fought with weapons ranging from medieval swords to modern firearms. But their battles were pointless. Eternal. When someone died, they reformed and resumed fighting. When someone won, their victory lasted only minutes before new enemies appeared. I kept to the shadows, moving from doorway to doorway. The Tower of Wrath dominated the city center, a spiral of black stone that twisted up into the cavern ceiling. According to Sophie's notes, it housed the souls of those who'd killed in anger. The medieval accounts described it as a prison within a prison where the most violently wrathful souls were contained. Getting inside required passing through a courtyard where 2 armies eternally battled over something that no longer mattered. Roman legionnaires against Visigoth warriors. Their conflict was frozen in time and repeated endlessly. I waited for a lull in the fighting and sprinted across the courtyard. A Visigoth warrior saw me and charged, swinging a battle axe that gleamed with supernatural sharpness. I rolled under his swing and kept running. Behind me, the warrior roared and gave chase. The tower entrance was guarded by 2 figures in medieval armor. They moved to block my path, drawing swords that burned with cold fire. Living man, one said, you don't belong here. I'm looking for someone, a woman who came here 3 months ago. Many come, few leave, none live. The Visigoth warrior caught up, swinging his axe in a horizontal arc aimed at my head. I ducked, and his weapon slammed into the first guardian's shield. The 2 dead warriors immediately forgot about me and began fighting each other. I slipped past them into the tower. The interior was a spiral ramp leading upward around a central well. Cells lined the walls, each containing a soul consumed by eternal rage. They screamed and hammered on their doors, begging for release, for weapons, for something to kill. I climbed the ramp, checking each level. The souls were categorized by the type of violence. Murderers on the first level, torturers on the second, and tyrants on the third. Each level was worse than the last. The rage more concentrated, more toxic. On the 7th level, I found her. Sophie sat in a cell with bars made of what looked like crystallized screaming. She was alive, conscious, but something was wrong with her eyes. They were black like the other souls, but not completely. Flecks of brown remained, fighting against the darkness. Sophie. She looked up, and for a moment, I saw my daughter. Then the black returned, and she snarled like an animal. Who dares disturb my contemplation of murder? It's me, it's Dad. Sophie blinked, and the brown flecks expanded. Dad, what are you doing here? Getting you out. You can't. I'm bound here. The Guardian of Wrath claimed me when I tried to leave. He said I belonged here because of what I did. What did you do? Sophie's eyes went fully black again. I killed him, the priest who was following me, Father Toretti. He tried to stop me from coming here. He said the church had to protect its secrets. So I hit him with a tire iron until he stopped moving. The pieces fell into place. Sophie's paranoia, her rush to get here, and the car accident that killed her. She'd murdered a Vatican priest to protect her research, then been compelled to drive into a wall as punishment. That doesn't matter now. I'm getting you out of here. The cell can't be opened from the outside. The Guardian has the only key. Where is he? At the top of the tower. But Dad, you can't fight him. He's not like the other souls. He's something older. I climbed to the top level, where the spiral ramp ended at a single chamber. The Guardian of Wrath sat on a throne made of weapons from every war in human history. He was enormous, maybe 8 feet tall, with skin like molten metal and eyes that burned with genuine fire. The father comes for the daughter, he said in a voice like avalanches. How touching. Let her go. She killed a servant of God. The wrathful belong to me now, especially those who murder priests. She was protecting knowledge, trying to help people. She was protecting herself. The priest threatened her, so she chose violence. That choice bound her to my realm. The Guardian stood up from his throne. In his hand was a key made of black iron, glowing with heat. But I am not unreasonable. I offer you a bargain. Single combat. If you win, the key is yours. If you lose, you join your daughter in eternal imprisonment. What kind of combat? The kind that matters. Fight me with the weapons of wrath. Prove your anger burns hotter than mine. He threw me a sword that materialized from thin air. The blade was ordinary steel, but it felt right in my hands, balanced and sharp and hungry for violence. The Guardian drew his own weapon, a massive 2-handed sword that trailed fire. We circled each other in the chamber while my mind raced through everything I knew about medieval combat. I'd studied historical fighting techniques as part of my research, even taken some classes for authenticity. But studying something and doing it were different things. The Guardian had been fighting for centuries. He swung first. A downward stroke meant to split me in half. I sidestepped, and the burning blade crashed into the stone floor, sending up sparks. I counterattacked, aiming for his exposed side. But my blade bounced off his molten skin without leaving a mark. Your anger is weak, the Guardian said. You fight with technique, not with wrath. He was right. I was fighting like a historian, not like a father whose daughter was imprisoned by a monster. I thought about Sophie in that cell. her eyes turning black. I thought about the priest who'd been following her, threatening her. I thought about the Vatican conspiracy that had gotten my daughter killed. Rage flooded through Menet, the cold anger I'd felt since Sophie died. But a hot, immediate fury that made my vision go red. I attacked with abandon, swinging the sword in wild arcs that had no technique but plenty of violence. The guardian parried, but I kept coming, each blow powered by months of grief and fury. My blade found gaps in his defense. Not enough to seriously wound him, but enough to prove I could hurt him. Black blood dripped from cuts on his arms and chest. Better, he admitted, but not enough. He grabbed my sword blade barehanded, his molten skin hissing against the steel. Then he headbutted me, sending me sprawling across the chamber. I rolled to avoid his follow-up attack and came up bleeding from my nose. The guardian was stronger, faster, and more experienced. But he was also arrogant. He'd been winning fights for so long that he'd forgotten to be careful. I feinted left and dove right, getting inside his guard. My sword punched through his chest below the ribcage, angled upward toward his heart. The guardian roared and swung his flaming sword at my head. I ducked and twisted my blade, feeling it scrape against bone. Impossible, he gasped. You're not wrathful enough to hurt me. I'm not fighting with wrath, I said. I'm fighting with love. I twisted the sword again, and the guardian collapsed. The fire in his eyes went out, and his molten skin cooled to ordinary gray. His weapons clattered to the floor. I picked up the black iron key and ran back down the spiral ramp to Sophie's cell. She was still sitting in the corner, but the black had almost completely faded from her eyes. Dad. I'm here. The key turned easily in the lock. Sophie stumbled out of the cell and into my arms. She felt solid, real, but cold as winter. How did you beat him? I didn't fight his fight. He expected rage but got determination instead. We climbed back down the tower, past the fighting souls, and through the chaotic city streets. The ferryman was waiting at the pier as if he'd known we'd be coming. Passage for 2. I said. What's the price? The dead girl owes nothing. She has already paid. But you owe 10 years for bringing the dead back to life. 10 years. I'd already paid for getting here. 14 years total. Nearly a quarter of my remaining life. I looked at Sophie, who was slowly returning to her normal color and warmth. Deal. The cold settled deeper into my bones. This time, when we reached the other shore, I felt like I'd aged a decade in the span of minutes. Sophie helped me walk back through the tunnels, past the 3 souls who cheered when they saw us, and returning up the stone steps to the church basement. Dawn was breaking when we climbed out of the well. Sophie was fully alive again, breathing normally, her eyes completely brown. But she remembered everything. I killed him, Dad. Father Toretti. I hit him with a tire iron because he was going to stop me. That was hell's influence. It makes you more of whatever you already are. You were determined to find the truth, so it made you violently determined. Does that excuse it? No, but it explains it. We drove back to my apartment in silence. Sophie made coffee while I sat on my couch, feeling ancient and exhausted. The price of bringing her back was already showing. Gray hair I hadn't had yesterday, and lines on my face that were deeper than they should be. What happens now? Sophie asked. Now we decide what to do with what we know. The Vatican will try to stop us. Maybe. Or maybe they'll try to recruit us. Someone has to guard the doors. And we've proven we can survive the descent. Sophie sat next to me on the couch. Was it worth it? Giving up 14 years of your life? I looked at my daughter alive and breathing and home safe. Every second. Father Rodriguez came to see us 3 days later. I answered the door expecting police or Vatican security, but found a thin man in his 60s wearing priest's robes and carrying a leather briefcase. He looked tired in the way people do when they've been dealing with problems that shouldn't exist. Dr. Harrison, I'm Father Rodriguez, from the Vatican Special Archives. I believe we need to talk. Sophie appeared behind me, still pale but getting stronger every day. About what? About your recent travel experiences and about Father Toretti's disappearance. We invited him in because refusing would have been pointless. If the Vatican wanted us dead, we'd be dead. If they wanted us to disappear, we'd disappear. The fact that Father Rodriguez was sitting in my living room making small talk meant they wanted something else. Coffee? Sophie asked. Please. Father Rodriguez waited until Sophie was in the kitchen before opening his briefcase. He pulled out a manila folder thick with documents and photographs. We know you went down, he said quietly. Both of you. The church has been monitoring the entrance for months. Then why didn't you stop us? Because we needed to know if it was possible. If someone with your daughter's research and your determination could make the descent and return. He spread photographs across my coffee table, images of the well, the tunnel entrances, even shots of the river of blood and the city of violence. Someone had been mapping hell with modern surveillance equipment. How long have you known? The church has known about the entrances for centuries. We've been guarding them, managing them, occasionally using them when necessary. But we've never had complete maps of the lower circles. Your daughter's research filled in gaps that have existed since the medieval period. Sophie returned with coffee and sat down next to me. She looked at the photographs without surprise. You were watching me the whole time. Father Toretti was assigned to monitor your research. When you got too close to actionable intelligence, he was instructed to intervene. So, I killed him for nothing. You killed him because hell's influence amplified your natural determination into a violent obsession. It happens to everyone who spends too much time studying the maps. The knowledge itself is corrupting. Father Rodriguez pulled out another set of documents, personnel files with photos of people I didn't recognize. These are Vatican researchers who've studied hellish geography over the past 50 years. Notice anything? I looked through the files. Every researcher had the same progression, normal academic work. Then a sudden interest in theological cartography. Then increasingly erratic behavior. And then death or disappearance. The maps don't just show the way to hell. Father Rodriguez said. They call to people. The knowledge wants to be used. Why are you telling us this? Because you've done something unprecedented. You went down, retrieved a lost soul, and returned without being corrupted. Your daughter was influenced. Yes, but she broke free of it. That suggests a natural resistance we've never seen before. Sophie set down her coffee cup. You want us to work for you. The church needs people who can navigate hell safely. Most of our agents who make the descent don't come back. Those who do come back changed. Usually for the worse. But you too might be different. What kind of work? Father Rodriguez pulled out a final set of photographs. Missing persons reports, police files, and newspaper clippings. People go missing near the entrances. Not many. Maybe a dozen per year across all 7 sites. Some are accidents. People who stumble into places they shouldn't. But others are deliberate people who've learned about the maps and decided to make their own descents. Like Sophie did. Exactly. Most of them get trapped, killed, or corrupted. A few become problems that require active management. We need people who can go down and bring them back. I thought about the soldier, Marie, and Giuseppe, 3 souls trapped for decades, maybe centuries. waiting for someone to help them find their way home. What about the ones who are already down there? The souls who've been trapped? That's a longer conversation. The Church's position on soul retrieval has evolved over the centuries. Currently, we believe that most souls are in hell for reasons that require divine rather than human intervention. That's convenient. Father Rodriguez didn't argue. Theology aside, there are practical considerations. Every soul we bring back changes the balance down there. Remove too many, and the remaining demons become more active. The violence increases, and the entrances become less stable. Sophie leaned forward. How many people have you brought back in the past 50 years? Maybe 30. All of them were recent arrivals. People who'd been trapped for months rather than years. Long-term residents like your 3 friends become part of hell's ecosystem. Removing them is more complicated. But possible. Possible. Yes. Advisable is a different question. Father Rodriguez began packing up his documents. I'm not asking for an immediate answer. Take time to consider what I've offered. But understand that your knowledge makes you valuable to the Church and dangerous to yourselves. There are factions within the Vatican who believe hellish knowledge should be eliminated entirely, along with anyone who possesses it. Is that a threat? It's a warning. Working with us provides protection. Refusing might not. After Father Rodriguez left, Sophie and I sat in my living room discussing our options. The smart choice was obvious. Cooperate with the Vatican. Help them retrieve trapped souls. And maybe eventually work toward freeing the long-term residents. But I'd spent 14 years of my life bringing Sophie back. The aging effects were already visible: gray hair, deeper wrinkles, and joints that ached in the morning. I looked like a man in his early 60s instead of his late 40s. How much time do I have left? I asked Sophie that evening. She'd been researching the physiological effects of supernatural aging, cross-referencing medical journals with medieval accounts of people who'd paid supernatural prices. The aging should level off now that the debt is paid. You'll age normally from this point forward, just from a more advanced starting position. So, maybe 25 good years instead of 40. That's not terrible. It's my fault. If I hadn't been so obsessed with proving the map was real. You were being a scholar. Scholars ask questions, even dangerous ones. I killed a priest. Dad. Hell killed a priest. You were just the weapon it used. We spent the next week researching Father Rodriguez's offer. The Vatican's Special Archives Division was real, though deeply classified. They handled supernatural threats, managed occult artifacts, and occasionally performed what their internal documents called dimensional interventions. The work was dangerous but necessary. People stumbled into hell by accident, got trapped, and died horribly. A few came back as demonic entities that required active containment. Having agents who could navigate hellish terrain was essential for managing these situations. Sophie found records of Vatican explorers dating back to the Crusades. Knights, priests, scholars, and even a few saints who'd made descents for various reasons. Most were one-time missions. A few had made multiple trips before disappearing or requesting reassignment. The longest-serving agent in recent history was Father Martinez, who'd made 16 descents over 7 years before retiring to a monastery in Tibet. His final report described increasing difficulty in distinguishing between earthly and hellish reality. It gets to everyone eventually, Sophie said. The question is whether we can do enough good before it gets to us. I thought about the soldier, Marie, and Giuseppe, 3 people who'd been waiting decades for someone to help them. How many others were down there, trapped by circumstances beyond their control? We'll try it for a year. I decided. We'll see how much we can help people. if it starts affecting our judgment, we quit. Sophie nodded. And if the Vatican doesn't let us quit, then we disappear. I've got enough money saved to relocate somewhere they can't find us. Father Rodriguez seemed pleased when we called to accept his offer. He arranged for training at a Vatican facility outside Rome. A compound that didn't appear on any map and was staffed by people who'd signed confidentiality agreements that made Sophie's research classification look casual. The training was intensive: physical conditioning, combat techniques, supernatural first aid, and detailed education about hellish geography. We learned to identify different types of demons, negotiate with trapped souls, and navigate the political structures that existed in various circles. Hell, we discovered, was more organized than medieval accounts suggested. Different regions had different rulers, laws, and customs. The circle of violence, where we'd found Sophie, was essentially a war zone with no permanent government. But other circles were more structured, with established hierarchies and formal procedures for dealing with living visitors. Our first official mission came 2 months after training ended. A graduate student from the University of Florence had disappeared near one of the sealed entrances. Campus security found her notes, which indicated she'd been researching medieval pilgrimage routes and had discovered references to the door beneath San Lorenzo. Sophie and I descended through the church basement entrance, now equipped with Vatican-issued gear that was considerably more advanced than what we'd used on our first trip. Radio beacons, emergency teleportation devices, and weapons designed specifically for supernatural combat. We found the student in the circle of greed, trapped in a maze of mirrors that reflected her deepest desires. She'd been wandering for weeks, chasing illusions of wealth and success that always stayed just out of reach. Getting her out required solving the maze's central puzzle and convincing her that what she truly wanted was to go home. It took 6 hours of careful conversation. But eventually, she chose reality over illusion. The extraction was routine. The student recovered completely, with no memory of her time underground. She resumed her studies in Renaissance art, never knowing she'd spent 3 weeks in hell. Over the next 8 months, Sophie and I conducted 17 more missions. We retrieved tourists who'd gotten lost in Roman catacombs and accidentally crossed dimensional boundaries. We extracted researchers who'd been studying occult texts and summoned demons. We even rescued a Vatican priest who'd been investigating supernatural phenomena and gotten trapped in the circle of heresy. Not all missions were successful. Some people had been underground too long, too changed by their experiences to return to normal life. Others refused to leave, convinced that hell was where they belonged. A few we found too late, already dead or transformed into something that could no longer be considered human. But we helped more people than we lost. And gradually, I began to understand why the church needed agents like us. The problem wasn't just individual rescues. Hell was expanding. The Vatican's monitoring equipment showed increasing activity at all 7 entrance points. More demons attempting to reach the surface. More souls trying to escape. And more disruption of the barriers that kept the realms separate. It's connected to the number of people who know the entrances exist. Father Rodriguez explained during one of our monthly briefings. Knowledge itself weakens the boundaries. The more people who study the maps, research the locations, or attempt unauthorized descents, the less stable the containment becomes. So, our work is making the problem worse. Your rescue work is necessary. But yes, every descent creates more instability. Eventually, we'll reach a point where the entrances can't be contained anymore. What happens then? Then hell comes to us. Sophie and I discussed this revelation over dinner that night. We'd been working for the Vatican for almost a year, and both of us had changed. Sophie was more confident, more decisive, The guilt over Father Toretti's death had faded as she focused on helping other people. I'd aged another few years beyond the supernatural debt but felt stronger and more purposeful than I had since before my wife died. "Do you regret it?" Sophie asked. "Taking the job?" "No. We've helped 18 people. That's more good than I accomplished in 15 years of academic research. But if our work is making the overall situation worse, then we find a way to make it better," Father Rodriguez said. "Knowledge weakens the boundaries. Maybe ignorance strengthens them." I was thinking about the medieval accounts, the careful secrecy surrounding hellish geography, and the Church's centuries-long effort to control information about the entrances. What if we're approaching this backward? I said. Instead of trying to rescue everyone who gets trapped, what if we work to seal the entrances permanently? Is that possible? I don't know, but it might be worth researching. Sophie smiled. "Dad, you're talking about deliberately destroying knowledge. That goes against everything we've always believed in. Not destroying it, containing it, the same way we contain demons and trap souls. Some knowledge is too dangerous to exist. Some knowledge is too dangerous to ignore." We spent the next month researching containment protocols, studying Vatican archives that made Sophie's original discovery look like public information. Deep in the special archives, we found references to a project called Final Seal, a theoretical plan for permanently closing all 7 entrances to hell. The project had been proposed in 1823, researched extensively, then abandoned when the Vatican Council decided the risks outweighed the benefits. Sealing the entrances would trap everyone currently in hell forever, including recently deceased souls who might otherwise be rescued through conventional theological means. But 1823 was different from today. In 1823, maybe a dozen people knew the entrances existed. Today, that number was in the hundreds and growing. Sophie's research had been independently discovered by at least 6 other scholars. The maps were spreading. "We need to make a choice," Sophie said. "Either we find a way to seal hell permanently, or we accept that eventually it's going to break through to our world." I thought about the soldier, Marie, and Giuseppe, still trapped down there, still waiting for rescue. If we sealed the entrances, they'd never get home. I thought about the 18 people we'd rescued, all of them alive and safe because we'd been willing to take risks. I thought about Rome, full of tourists and students and ordinary people who had no idea that hell was a subway ride away from the Vatican. "Let's find out if Final Seal is possible," I said. "Then we'll decide whether to use it." It took us 3 more months to locate the complete Final Seal documentation. The project required simultaneous action at all 7 entrance points, plus the use of artifacts that the Vatican had been collecting for centuries. It was possible, but barely. More importantly, it required people willing to remain at each entrance point to maintain the seals, 7 permanent guardians who would spend the rest of their lives ensuring hell stayed contained. Sophie and I volunteered for the Rome entrance. Father Rodriguez accepted our offer after consulting with his superiors for 2 weeks. "You understand that this is permanent," he said. "Once the seals are in place, you can't leave. The magic requires a constant human presence to remain stable." "We understand. And you accept that everyone currently in hell will remain there forever." I thought about the soldier one more time. Then I thought about everyone who would be safe if hell was permanently contained. "We accept." The Final Seal activation happened on a Tuesday in November. 7 teams, 7 entrance points, and 7 sets of guardians took up permanent residence in basements and crypts across Europe. Sophie and I moved our belongings into the basement of St. Joseph of the Carpenters. The Vatican had installed modern amenities, electricity, internet, a small kitchen, and sleeping quarters. We had books, movies, and communication with the outside world. It wasn't imprisonment. Exactly. It was a responsibility. The ceiling itself was anticlimactic. Sophie and I stood on opposite sides of the well, holding artifacts that looked like medieval compass roses, and spoke Latin words that made the air shimmer like heat waves. The darkness in the well thickened, solidified, and became something you could touch but not pass through. Hell was sealed. Sophie and I have been guarding the Rome entrance for 6 months now. Every morning, we check the seal's integrity. Every evening, we file reports with Father Rodriguez. Every night, we sleep in shifts to ensure constant vigilance. It's not the life I expected when I started researching my daughter's death. But it's a good life. Sophie and I spend our days reading, discussing history, and playing chess. We get visitors occasionally. Father Rodriguez stops by monthly. Other Vatican researchers consult us about supernatural phenomena. Sometimes I think about the people trapped in hell, the soldier who wanted to know if the war was over, and Marie and Giuseppe, still waiting for a rescue that will never come. But mostly, I think about the people who are safe, everyone in Rome, in the world, who will never accidentally stumble into hell because we're here to make sure the door stays closed. The Vatican keeps a map of hell, and we followed it. What we found there changed everything. What we chose to do about it will protect people for generations. Sophie says that's legacy enough for any lifetime. I agree. Thank you for listening to this entry from the Wilderness Protocol. If you made it through this report and wish to be briefed on future incidents, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel.